Hi, I'm Ashley. If this is your first time watching my channel, it's all about my journey as an untrained artist. So today I'm working on my portrait skills using a line and wash watercolor technique. I did this sketch lightly in pencil first because I'm definitely not at the confidence level to do portraits straight in ink. So basically today I'm going over what I already have in ink using my fine liners. And all the materials that I use are linked in the description, so if you want to know what I'm using, look there. Also, head into the comments at any time if you have any questions or just want to give feedback on the painting or the video. I'd love to hear your likes, your dislikes, any suggestions, or just to have a conversation about art, so head down into the comments. So I'm using a 0.1 millimeter, I think, fine liner for all of those initial lines. And I'm just trying to stay kind of loose with the lines, but still capturing the pose of this portrait. So this is one of my favorite wedding photos, and I really just wanted to try it out. I basically started here in, I guess, tracing out the lines that I had already in there, but I started at the top, worked my way down initially. So just kind of getting in the hairlines and the facial features was the important first step here. So for this hair, I do kind of add in a little bit of kind of hair sections in ink just to get a little bit of detail in there while trying to keep it not too detailed. And then for the facial features, I did keep them very simple. I feel like I could just really easily overwork the faces and then they would look all wonky. And so I did try to keep them very simple and light, just getting in kind of the basic face shapes and then a few small lines to indicate the features of the noses, both of our noses, eyes, and kind of the mouth for especially my husband, since he's the one that's more facing the camera. So you can kind of just see the edge of my face, but for his, you could see more of it. I will say that I didn't get exactly the face shape right for my husband. His chin isn't quite that blocky, but it does get the overall idea. So then I go in and work on kind of, I'm just working my way down still. So I'm working on getting our shoulders and arms in and getting my hand on my husband's shoulder here. It wasn't too bad. You can't really see my fingers. You can kind of just see the knuckles. So just kind of a bumpy line basically there to get the indication that my hand is kind of going over his shoulder. And that wasn't too bad. That was actually pretty easy. Now, my husband's hands, on the other hand, pun, they were pretty challenging. I definitely redid them quite a few times when I was doing the pencil sketch until I was finally happy with kind of the interlocking look of his fingers. And I was just really focused on the reference photo, trying to get those shapes in. But it just kind of played tricks with my mind because I'm trying to make, 4 fingers and a thumb on each hand and make them interlock. And it's hard to just draw the shapes and not think about what it is. And so it got really tricky there. So after finishing that part of the sketch, I guess I kind of decided to take a break from the figures in the picture, because I think I was feeling just a little bit overwhelmed with it after doing those hands. Like I said, that was definitely the hardest part. And I just decided to switch to an easier part. And the path here is really simple. So I went into the path and just got those curved lines in. I did try to get a few kind of like little interruptions in the lines just to make it feel a little bit looser. And also because kind of over the edges of the path, the grass was kind of poking up over the edges. So you would kind of see that sticking up and not really see the edge of the sidewalk path. But either way, just trying to make it a little bit loose. Also, just referring back to the reference photo still, I have the pencil sketch in, but I just want to make sure that kind of the angles and the proportions are still correct. So I do, when I'm reaching up, it's because I'm kind of looking at my phone, which is where my reference photo is, and you can kind of see very faintly that I did not stick with exactly where the pencil lines were initially. So just kind of, again, referring to the reference. So after kind of getting the paths generally sketched in, I thought about going back into the figures, but again, kind of just stayed away from it right now. And I put in the light pole that was behind us. And this part actually is the part that I was the least happy with in this sketch. So it starts out pretty good, and then it gets kind of wonky and very asymmetrical here at the bottom, and it looks like completely crooked. And it's the one part that just sticks out to me as being wonky on the sketch. So I wasn't super happy with that. The rest of the light pole turned out pretty good. I just kind of go up then and go to the top, and the kind of globe, I don't know what it's called, the top part of the light pole, the glass that surrounds the light bulb. Anyway, that part I was pretty happy with. It did get pretty symmetrical there, and I was happy with the overall shape of the top part of the light pole. Also, this is silly, but I was happy that it actually is vertical and it's not tilted, because that's something that sometimes I struggle with, and my vertical lines end up being tilted. So I was happy that it was straight. So after I did that light pole, I just went on to some of the other kind of mid-ground stuff. So if we consider kind of the figures and forward to be the foreground, then kind of where the path goes back away from both directions from the figure, and everything in that area is the mid-ground. And then everything behind that is the background. So here I'm working on just the mid-ground stuff, which is the light pole and then all of the kind of foliage that was back behind us in between kind of the two areas of path. So I do some larger trees, and this tree, I kind of want it to be a little bit of a focal point. So I'm putting quite a bit more detail on this tree, and my goal for the tree is to make it asymmetrical. The light pole, trying to be symmetrical, right? It's man-made. It is symmetrical. The tree is nature, and trees are not symmetrical. So was really going for that. And I did quite a bit in the ink there to kind of get those branches. Then just go in and kind of do some other trees and some bushes, and being a little bit faster and less meticulous on these ones, just trying to get a general idea of branches and bushes, but not being quite as meticulous on kind of where the branches were, I guess. Just for reference, the video is sped up by 2, so it's double speed basically, but you can definitely get an idea that the first tree I did a lot slower, and then these other kind of bushes, hedges, and trees I'm going a lot faster and being a lot looser with my pen. So after I do some of the trees, I do put in kind of a horizon line and the kind of hills in the background behind the foliage. So that is like truly background now. And so I just gently, I don't know if that's right, but loosely sketched in that, and kind of sketched in where the kind of barrier was between kind of the mid-ground and the background, I guess, with those bushes. I was trying to make a distinction there. So after finishing all of that, I went back into the figures. And so this was really just finishing up all of that tracing. I don't know why it is sometimes a little bit worrisome to go over the pencil and ink, but it is. I don't know if it's just because I feel like I'm going to mess up what I already did in pencil. I'm going to, it's ink now, it's permanent. It's not something that I can erase and fix later. So if I get jerky or something and go off the line, I feel like it's going to be a huge deal. And I really know that it's not a huge deal, because in the long run, like, you're not going to see some wobbly lines. You're going to see the overall picture and not pick out a single line. And having some of those wobbly lines is actually what gives the painting a little bit more character and a little bit more personality, and makes it not feel so stiff. It almost makes it have some movement and some differences. So I don't know, just having to embrace that, I guess. So the biggest thing with doing the dress here is that the trying to get kind of some folds in it with kind of where I place strategic ink lines to show that that fabric is folded over. Also trying to get kind of that scalloped wavy edge on the bottom of the dress and kind of around that keyhole back, because it is a lace dress, and so it's not like a perfectly smooth circle. So just trying to get some waviness and movement to that. Then after finishing that up, I go ahead and go into painting. So I started with my metallic paints actually here, and so you can see them there. Again, link in the description if you want to know which metallic paints I use. They're from Amazon. I can't remember the brand right now. But I did use kind of a metallic gold champagne color for the light, and I really know that, like, I want this to be a glowy area, and so I do want it to be bright and kind of stand out. And so I painted in the metallic in the lamp itself, and then kind of wet around it to help it bleed out so that it looks like it's glowing around it. I also used the metallic paint for my dress. So the dress is a champagne color, and it really kind of picked up the light and shimmered, especially with kind of this lamp glow light. You can really tell that it's champagne. And so using that metallic champagne color was really perfect, and it made the dress really pop in the painting. Like, when you look at it, it's very obvious, and that really sticks out. So initially I just started with a really light wash of the metallic paint, just lots of water, very little of the pigment. And then to build up the shadows, I used a more concentrated version of the same paint, and I'm really focused on kind of the edges under kind of the scallopy edge where shadows would be, and then anywhere that there's like a fold in the garment, I added a darker shadow. Again, really just trying to get depth, trying to get movement there. And then after looking at the dress and the lamp, I decided the lamp was too dark. So I kind of used a damp brush, wet it, and lifted it up with a paper towel. And then I went in with just a lighter wash of the same color, just so that it wasn't quite as dark. I mean, painting light is challenging, right? You got to preserve the highlights, and I just felt like it was too dark. Now, I don't have any of the dark values in, so it's really hard to, I guess, say if it truly was too dark or not, but I felt like it was. So before it dried completely, I decided to lift some of it out. After finishing with those metallics, I mixed up the color for the cement path, so it's just a soft gray. And then I used my Princeton Select mop brush, and I wet that kind of whole area so that I could use wet on wet technique to fill in the paths, so that it was just a soft bleed or like a soft, fairly even wash. After doing kind of that first part, I wet that second part of the path and do the same thing, just mix up a little bit more color. tap my brush on the paper towel just because it had a little too much water on it. Just know that that's always kind of a trick. If it looks like it's like dripping water, just tap it on the brush. Also, if you do end up putting too much water on the page still, same thing, just kind of lift it off with the brush and tap it back on the paper towel. And you can always pick up some of that extra water, some extra pigment if you have too much paint on there. You can always lift it back off as long as it's still wet, so no big deal. After doing the path, I just mixed up a skin color, and I have learned with skin that you start with kind of whatever base color you want. Usually I start with like a pinkish color because my husband and I are both real white, and we have pink undertones in our skin, especially my husband. He's a redhead. He's always a little bit pink and sunburned. But you start with kind of whatever color you want. And then if it's too much of something, you add the opposite. So if you start with pink, then you want to tone that down basically and take it more toward a neutral. So you add the opposite of pink or red, which is green. And that takes it to that brown color. But it still has, if you add just a little bit of the green at a time, you can still get those pink undertones. If you're looking for a skin that's more of olive undertones, start the other way. Start with more green and then add the pink in until you get the right kind of tone of brown. If you're more yellow, kind of undertones the skin, again, start with yellow and then add purple to it to get, those are opposites. So just a trick to build the skin colors if you don't have convenience color. I've heard them called, if you just buy all the colors of watercolor or any paints, I guess they're called convenience colors, so you don't have to mix them. But I do mix my own skin tones. I don't have a lot of colors. As you can see here, the top of my palette is all of my Winsor & Newton Cotman colors. That's what I use right now is Cotman colors. I have not invested in professional colors. And those are the only colors I have that you see right there, basically. I don't even have a red. I need to buy a red. I don't have a true red. I have pink and that orange color. So I have to almost like mix a red, which is challenging considering that it's a primary color, but I do it. So I've gone completely off track now with what I was going to talk about. But anyway, so skin color, that's where I was. Yeah. So skin color, get that skin color in. Anywhere that I needed it to be darker, I just tapped in some darker shades, adding a little bit of purple for the shadow color. Any highlighted areas, if I felt like it got too dark, I just lifted some of the color out with a damp brush. So after doing the skin color and getting all the skin areas painted, I mixed up a hair color. So it's slightly like orangish red for my husband's hair, and then a little bit darker for my hair. And at this point, like if I just look at what I have so far with the skin, the dress, the path, the hair, I'm actually pretty happy with how this is turning out, and I don't feel like it's an ugly phase. And that's really rare. So usually with watercolor, I think it's just because typically we start with lighter values and then like build up, and we don't have any contrast or dark values in until more the end. So I feel like it just goes through this ugly, awkward stage, and it feels like it's unsalvageable. I don't know. Do you ever feel that way about your paintings sometimes? If so, what strategies do you have to kind of push through those kind of quote unquote ugly phases? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your strategies, how you get through it. But anyway, after getting kind of the hair and the skin basically done, I mixed up the colors for the flowers. And again, I don't have red, so I have to mix a red. So I use pink, I use a little bit of the orange, a little bit of kind of a tiny bit of brown or gray to make it a little bit darker. But yeah, so the flowers are red and white. So I used a smaller brush here. I think it's a 0, maybe it's a 2, but use it to get in kind of those details. I do those red flowers first. And then after doing that, I'll mix up some greens. I only have one green, so it's sap green. I mix it with the different blues. So in this case, I think I mixed it with Prussian blue, and that gets like a little bit of a darker green for the stems. My bouquet was calla lilies, so you can kind of feel that shape of the calla lilies there. And they were red and white. So I got the red ones in, putting in the stems. And then for the white, I use just a very, very, very light wash of the green, actually, just to get like a tiny bit of an undertone that maybe kind of the stem of the calla lily is bleeding into the flower itself. And that just makes it so that it doesn't look completely white, and it kind of defines where they are. Then with that same brush, I just go in and do my husband's tie, which was just like a chocolate brown. So just painted that in while I had this brush out and was using it anyway. It's another kind of small detail area. So after finishing up kind of those small details, I went into the background. So I'm using wet on wet technique for the sky here, and just use that same mop brush, wet up the background, the sky, and this picture was actually taken at dusk, so the sky was pretty dark. So mostly I'm using Payne's Gray. It's mixed with a little bit of the blue that's still on my palette, which is probably a mix of variety of blues, I don't know, but I just kind of mix it all together and go with it. And I was very happy with kind of this bluish gray color for capturing the dusk. And here I'm really trying to go around that lamplight, trying to preserve kind of that glowy area. And so I went around it first, and then I used a damp clean brush to wet that glowing area, and then just gently touched basically the sky color to make it bleed in just a little bit. So it still has that glow around it, but it kind of has that soft edges of the bleeding of the sky color. Then used just a little bit of a darker blue color for the hills in the background. And that kind of also shows that it's more dusk. The hills have that bluish gray color. They're not green or brown, where they're a warm color in the sunlight. The sun is pretty much set here, so it has that blue color. And then move on to the midground area with all the foliage. So again, just using wet on wet. I use the mop brush to get everything in that area wet, and then I'm just going to tap in kind of various green mixtures. So again, just start with that sap green, mix in each of my 3 blues at various times to get different temperatures of green. So the things that were farther back, I tried to make a cooler green, cooler and deeper value to show that they're farther back, they're more in the dark, not as much light on them. And then the stuff that was closer to the front, I did a warmer and lighter value of green. So just to show that kind of the light was shining on it there. Also, some variations to that just to show that it was kind of different types of plants. But for the most part, the background was darker and cooler. So here I am kind of going in and tapping in the color. It's wet on wet, so it's not going to get harsh edges where I tap, but it does offer a little bit of texture. You can see a little bit of the sky kind of peeking through slightly where the trees are. So again, just continuing to mix up different greens for, again, some of those more they're still midground, but closer to the foreground elements, adding in just a tiny bit of a brown color to kind of warm them up. After kind of getting most of that texture in, I do lay a very light wash. So that background, that texture is mostly dry at this point. then I go in with just a very watery mix of that similar green color just to kind of fill in a little bit between the holes. You can still see kind of some of the sky poking through, but then it shows a little bit more depth with variety of greens. I guess I could have done that light wash first and then done the tapping for the texture after. Looking at it, I don't know that it made a huge difference with doing one first versus the other, because I didn't like scrub after, so it didn't really reactivate those underneath layers. I just very lightly placed that wash on over it. So I think it was fine how I did it. Then I just go in and do the lamp post. So the lamp post was a really dark green, so just mixed up another variation of green. You can get endless variations by just mixing different proportions of the same colors. So went in with that. And I was happy with the color of the lamppost here, even though I still wasn't very happy with the shape at that bottom part. I do feel like I was able to adjust it slightly with the watercolors so it doesn't look quite as asymmetrical as it did before I put in the watercolor, but still, you know, the bottom looked funky. So after doing that, I went back up to kind of the light area, and some of my greens had bled into it a little bit too much. So just lifted some of it out. Again, damp brush, kind of wet the area, scrubbed a little bit, patted with the paper towel. That lifted out some of that color. And then went back in with a little bit, tiny bit more of the metallic color just to make it pop a little bit. Then I felt like it wasn't doing very much. Like it wasn't doing it for me. So I went in with just a little bit of a warm yellow to make it look a little bit more glowy. I don't know. I'm not sure if it worked exactly how I kind of envisioned it working, but overall, I mean, I'm pretty happy with it, even though it might not be exactly right. Light's really hard, especially in watercolor. It's preserving the light areas. So I'm still learning, and it'll get better, but I'm okay with it. After that, basically just mix up more greens, finish up filling in kind of the grassy areas of the painting, and just basically more foliage, trying to get a little bit of texture in, just going for variety, really trying to capture that nature has every color of green that you could possibly imagine. Just keep kind of tapping in different values, going for now a more concentrated version of similar colors, just building up the depth of the painting here and continuing to add contrast. Now, after finishing up the foliage, I came back to the very darkest part of the painting. So my husband's suit was black, and just using a very concentrated version of black paint to paint in his suit. And I really did just fill in. Now, this was just, coloring book status, but I was trying to be really, really careful to stay in the lines. And I've never been super good at coloring in the lines. I don't know why. I don't know. Just haven't been. So I'm just being really careful. Especially when I was next to my dress, just really wanted that to be a nice clean line, clean contrast, and making sure that nothing was bleeding here. So everything on the figures was dry before I started this. And that's really important, because if the areas next to it are wet, then the paint will bleed in if it touches it at all. So just make sure it's all the way dry. Don't be afraid to turn your work. Turning it made it easier to get that nice straight line against my dress there, and never be afraid to do that. It sometimes just makes more sense. I've also heard that if you draw upside down it can help you achieve like improved perspective and shape because you focus on just drawing the shapes rather than trying to draw the things. I don't know if that's really true though, and that doesn't apply to this stage of the painting, but I just think that it's interesting, and I have never actually tried it, but it is an interesting thought. So anyway, after getting that first wash of black in, I did just go in with another layer of black just to make it darker, a little bit more of a true black, but still kind of keeping a little bit of areas of highlight, just to show a little bit of contrast and just making sure I'm getting all of the areas that should be black. So there's some really small areas kind of behind my arm and shoulder that you can see a little bit of the suit. And so just again, being very kind of precise with this part of the painting. Other parts I was a little bit looser, this part kind of precise. So after that, just kind of go in and add a little bit of deeper colors to some of the shadowy areas. So you can see I did that on both of our hair, added in a little bit of deeper color, added in deeper color on the shoes. Basically, I'll go in and do some areas on the lamp in a few minutes, or a few seconds, I guess is more accurate. But I'll go in, kind of add some shadows to the lamp, add some branches on the trees, just kind of some finishing details. I also did add a little tiny bit of black paint on the facial features. I could have gone in, I guess, with a thicker fine liner and done the same thing, but I already had the black paint and this detail brush, so I just went with that. Okay, now here I am going ahead and adding in some details or some shadow areas on the lamp. So for the kind of tree trunks and branches, I mixed a little bit of my darker brown. I don't remember what the name of that color is. Maybe burnt umber, I think. Anyway, mixed it with some of the black to make it even darker. And then just kind of dragging in some branches there, just to get a little bit of illusion of some of those details. So after getting in that, I decided that I wanted the grass to have just a little bit of additional texture. So I mixed up some of that similar grassy color and then used my fan brush. And so my brush, you could see I was wiping it or drying it on the paper towel. So the brush is pretty dry. And then I went in to the paint. And so it's almost like a dry brush technique. And I just used the fan brush. I did some dabbing. I did some very, very small like brush strokes, kind of scraping, dry brushing some of that paint in to get a little bit of a grassy texture. I really am using very, very small brush strokes to get that kind of short cut, I guess freshly mowed short grass look. And really, that's the final touch, is just getting that grass texture in there. And that final detail, I feel like, really helped to bring the grass into the foreground. It just brought that forward and pushed everything else back. So basically having that additional texture and detail in the foreground just demonstrates that it's closer to us, right? We can see the details better, and everything in the background is less detailed. And so that really kind of finished it off. So overall, really happy with this painting. It is a line and wash painting, though I would say that the line work was not really the highlight of it. It was definitely more kind of watercolor based than ink based. The main area that you can see the line work is really just kind of in the facial features, and then kind of our hands. But anyway, I definitely think that I really captured the moment well, and it kind of gets the feeling of that secluded moment at dusk on our wedding day. So anyway, thank you for watching. I appreciate it, and I hope you have an awesome day.